Hello everyone. Welcome to this panel, which I'm afraid is between you and the unconference bit. So and we're here to talk about managing a portfolio. Now we have an hour and a half for this, so this is either going to be plenty of time or not nearly enough. We shall see. I'd also like to just say that I'm aware that this is a bit of a manel. We are all white men here, and this is not the fault of the organisers at all. This is more a reflection of the community as it stands at the moment, and I think this is something that we obviously need to work on as we move forward as a community. So we'll start off with some introductions. And so I'm Rob Haines. I'm Head of Research IT here at the University of Manchester. I've been primarily a research software engineer in my career. I've been involved with research software engineering for about 10 years, 1 week and 2 days. So we had our decadal anniversary last week. And I'll ask the rest of the panel to introduce themselves now. So I'll start with...
Hi, yeah, you've met me before. So I'm involved in various HPC systems at Birmingham and in the regional ones there, and I run the research software group at Birmingham.
And the problem I've got on this side is I have two Marks.
Which
so
one?
Mark Turner.
Okay, so my name is Mark Turner. I'm Head of Research Software Engineering at Newcastle University. Like Rob, I've been doing RSC work for about 10 years. I've been at Newcastle in all of that time, had various different job titles, been shunted around from software developer, research software specialist. It depended on who in HR was filling in the paperwork when my contract got extended. And then when I saw the first RSC conference in 2016, I saw that, I was like, that's me. So I went to that and have had the job title of RSC ever since. In that time, I've been involved in was the association with Rob at the time. We turned that into the society, into a registered charity. I've tried to do other things in the community, and this year I'm the program chair for the RSC conference in September, so I hope to see many of you there.
Mark Wilkinson.
So hi, I'm Mark Wilkinson. I'm Professor of Astrophysics at the University of Leicester, and I'm also the director of the DRI HPC facility. So that's the STFC HPC facility that supports the theory community in particle physics, astrophysics, nuclear physics and cosmology. And I'll say a bit more about the resources we provide later.
Okay, thank you. And online we have Chris Woods.
Yeah. Hi again, Christopher Woods. I'm Head of Research Software Engineering at the University of Bristol.
Okay, thank you. So I thought a good place to start then with this panel is for further introduction to our panel is if we start off with a question along the lines of what is the nature of the resources you manage for managing a portfolio, can be people and things. What are the nature of the resources you manage, and what is the ideal balance that you aim for? And I'll start with Mark Turner.
Thanks. So the nature of the resources I manage, well, they're all people. So we don't have any claim over any hardware, so we don't manage the university's HPC systems or anything like that. So I purely run an RSC team. In there's a mixture of software engineers basically and some data scientists as well. So it's a very varied skill set amongst those people, but they are all people. What was the second part of the question?
What is the ideal balance that you aim for? Can you aim for a balance?
Can I aim for? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how that really makes sense when it's all people. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, that's a fair point, I think. Ed.
Okay, so two different things, I guess, because my wider group is responsible for the HPC systems at Birmingham. So I'll talk about HPC things briefly. We operate of 10 to 15,000 core tier 3 system, and we like to have it fully used all the time with 0Q. That's the balance we aim for. And the same on our Baskerville tier 2 system. And we have some slightly controversial decisions about how we manage limits, which I might tell you about later if you're lucky. I also run an RSC group, and the difficult balance to strike in that, because I've got 10 people, vaguely speaking, half of them are funded to work on research projects. This isn't actually true, but it's simplification. Half of them funded to work on research projects, and half of them are core funded. And the balance I want is for exactly that, for the people on funded projects to be working on funded projects, so they recover their costs, and the people on core funding don't work on funded projects, so I can do the things they're employed to do. And what I sometimes end up having to do is to get the core people working on funded projects, or the other way around, which is a hard thing. I want it to work perfectly.
Chris, we go to Chris online.
Yes, so like Mark, I manage a team of research software engineers. So again, just managing sort of people as a resource. In terms of the balance, because the RSCs at Bristol are involved in providing a lot of teaching, as well as providing sort of mostly embedded RSC kind of activity, the balance is really about how I make sure I keep all of the RSCs in the team happy, how I make sure we keep all of the students sort of educated across all of the different things we're trying to educate. Obviously, all the partners we're involved with happy and the projects are making progress, but the most important to me is that all of the members of the RSC team are not just sort of happy, but they're challenged, and so they're always growing, so that they can develop the skills that they want to develop, but also develop the skills that I think that they will need to develop for their future careers.
Thank you. Mark Wilkinson.
So DRI has 4 systems. So we've got 3 services at 4 sites. So we've got at Edinburgh, Cambridge, Durham and Leicester. And we've a mix of different architectures. So I'm talking about the hardware side first. Mix of different architectures, which is based on the science workflows that need to be supported. So we've got a mix of AMD Rome on the CPU side, Intel Skylake, Cascade Lake and Ice Lake, and A100 GPUs, and in fact 2 different kinds of A100 GPUs in terms of memory. And the balance between those services is determined by the science case. So we have a long process that we go through where the community writes a science case first, which is independent of the hardware, and it's just the community saying this is what we want to do in the next 3 to 5 years. That's then translated into workflows and high-level scoping for the services. And that science case is peer-reviewed. Once it's been peer-reviewed, it's then translated into high-level service specifications. The technical case then is peer-reviewed again, and then we move on to actually doing co-design with our vendors to work out how we'll actually deliver it. We can say, I'll probably say more about that process later. So in terms of the hardware, that's how the balance between the different components comes about. In terms of people, there's technical support teams at each of the sites. All of the DRI staff are embedded within larger tech support teams at each of the host sites. We also have software engineers, and again, they're embedded at various different sites around the country. I think the challenge on the RSE side in terms of balance is a mix of having general skills and domain-specific skills, and that's something, getting the balance between that is tricky, because what you need this year in terms of domain-specific skills may not be what you need next year, so that's always a challenge.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll say a little bit about the Manchester situation. So in Research IT, we manage the local HPC resources for the university, and we're also involved in N8 and the bead machine. As head of Research IT, I delegate the entire responsibility of the HPC provision to Simon Hood, who was on the panel this morning. But for the RSC side of the organisation, that's still very much under my purview. And from what Chris and Mark has said, and indeed about balance, it is really difficult. Ideally, it would be an entirely happy group of RSCs who are all challenged and all doing things which align exactly with the domain knowledge they have, the technical expertise they have, but also the stretch for some development and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, the work doesn't always come in those nice, neat packages. So striking a balance between having someone with a PhD in astronomy working on something with a professor of linguistics is interesting. That's worked surprisingly well, by the way. So that's it's all XML, you see. So just different formats of XML. But yeah, striking that balance and making sure everyone's I think at least got, should we say, at least got something that they enjoy doing is what we aim for. So so at this stage, I'll just sort of throw it out to the floor. Is there anyone who has any questions out there so far? Is there anything online? Okay. I'm not seeing anything. So so we've all talked a bit about balance, and so what about conflict? So when conflict arises between competing communities for resources, on campus or external as well, how do we resolve this? Ed, would you like to start on that one?
Conflict. So we had a management committee meeting where conflict often arises from lack of shared understanding. So one very senior academic was saying, people are being antisocial on the HPC system by running 400 core jobs or something. Ours is a tier 3 HPC system. We say HPC because it's shorthand. We probably really mean mostly HTC. And this researcher would tend to run many small jobs, but he was queuing and he could see that other people were running like 400 cores. So he was quite concerned because he felt like other people were hogging it and he couldn't get on it. Now that's probably, I imagine there's a lot of people who've been in that position. So how did we deal with the conflict? The management committee has people from all different colleges at the university, and so I tried very levelly to explain why our limits are set the way they're set, to try and explain the misunderstanding, the misconception that actually he wasn't queuing because people were running 400 core jobs. He was queuing because there was some kind of reservation coming up and his jobs couldn't start because they wouldn't fit in the window, I think. But explaining carefully to people how explaining to people why they're wrong without saying that they're wrong is how you do it. Because it's not his fault that he was wrong. All the information he got led him to believe a conclusion. And in the end, he sort of went away accepting it, but I'm not sure totally agreeing with it.
Okay, thank you. Chris.
So I think communication is the most important thing. The conflict means you have two people who have different opinions on something, maybe myself managing the resource and somebody wanting the resource. What I find is it's really interesting to find out why that the other person believes the things they believe, and actually getting them to explain why they think they're not getting what they want and giving them the reasons why they have a conflict can be very educational. And sometimes by getting them to talk about that, you actually then are able to resolve the conflict by sort of, again, showing your side of things, or even recognizing when there's something that's missing that you're not providing. So for example, on the teaching side, one of the things we're always having to try and resolve is we have a large number of different groups who want different things to be taught to them. And it's how we schedule all of the various workshops so that everybody gets the mix of, in person and online and everything else. What we found was, again, being very open with what resources available and really trying to make as much use as possible of things like online teaching, so different ways of delivering things, so that we could bring everybody with us to agreeing that this would enable more availability without increasing the amount of, the amount of people or the amount of money being provided. So effectively a different way of resolving the issue or supplying the thing that people wanted. The other way that you kind of deal with conflict is almost by nipping it in the bud before it starts. So with the RSC group, we have a completely free layer, which is our Ask RSC layer. And because we have all of the training, which is completely free and online as well and provided in video form, it means that when people come to us wanting something, we can always point them towards that first. And that actually belays most of the conflicts if I can't get any help, because you can point them to the free things and you can really provide extra via the free things. And then when they then need to make the jump up to paid, you can then get a route to get the extra resource needed to support them.
Yeah, thank you. So I think one of the interesting points that you both made there was that in some cases it's maybe just a lack of information. They can see some of what's happening. So in your case, they could see that other people were getting what they thought was priority access, and actually there was some other information, there was this other thing coming through that fit in. So yes, it's interesting when you have these conversations and actually sort of reflect, is there just some information missing? And if we had this thing that said, well, the reason why this doesn't fit in is because of this, then that would maybe not satisfy people, but may reduce the amount of conflict that you're seeing. I think these things are always quite interesting. So I guess same question to Mark Wilkinson.
So the answer I was going to give to this was I've no idea, because we've never had any conflict, because our community just works beautifully together. I can't say that because the former chair of our oversight committee, Alan, is in the audience, so he knows the truth. So DRI was originally set up from essentially bringing together all the research groups around the UK that were using large-scale computing for their research in the theory areas of STFC. And so traditionally, all of these groups were competing for funding. And so transforming that set of communities into a group that could actually bid for funding together took about 10 years, to be honest. It was my predecessor, Jeremy Yates. It took years of careful negotiation between all the various interested parties to get it to a point where now everybody is essentially on the same page. Every so often we have disagreements, but I think the key thing, as has already been said, it requires a lot of investment of time. It can't be done quickly and easily. You can't just have a conflict resolution process that will sort these things out. It takes a lot of effort and sitting down with people, listening and trying to understand what exactly is the underlying problem, because it's often it can be just a perception that there's more funding in one area than another, or there's more resource going to one area or another, and always explaining how decisions have been made is key. I think the other thing is having good decision-making, transparent decision-making processes in place. So when it comes to deciding how big services are going to be, it needs to be done in a way that everybody can see how the decision was made. In terms of allocation of resources, once we have our services, that's managed by STFC, so that there's a resource allocation committee. So that's completely separate. So that is the conflicts there are the usual conflicts that any community has with an awarding body. I think, in terms of practical things that have already been mentioned, but scheduler issues are probably apart from the overall size of the systems, its schedulers are the things that everybody complains about, because everybody thinks that their jobs are getting lower priority than the next person's jobs, whether they are or not.
Okay, and I think it's probably worth sort of saying as well at this point that the word conflict sounds a bit strong, and sometimes it can actually mean resources are contended with actual people at each other's throats around it. I think one of the nice points you just brought up there, Mark, is I don't think you quite used the word, but what through my head was governance, and being able to lean on your governance, shall we say, sometimes to resolve these. so I suppose at the University of Manchester, where the RSC team is concerned, we're very much focused on the local community, and were we to have such a contention that we actually had to start choosing quite decisively as to what to do or what to not do, or what to delay and what not to delay. I think we'd have to go back to the university's perhaps academic governance and say, well, bearing in mind what you know about the priorities for the university, the priorities of the research councils, the priorities for research, where should we go with this? And I think that's sort of a get out of jail card sometimes for us.
Can I just come back on one point there? I think in terms of governance, it's important that the governance and the processes are in place before you get to the problem. Because so if you know there's a difficult decision coming up, you get everyone to discuss what the process should be so that you're all agreed on that, and that makes it much easier then, because you can rely on the process because everybody agreed on that at the start. So
Yeah.
that helps.
No one wants to be the reason why a new process has been developed.
Yeah. And it's very hard to, if you bring in a process because of something that's happened.
Don't feel very special. You feel like it's even worse. So Mark Turner.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo a lot of what's already been said about transparency and communication, these are all really key things. I'll pick up on the contention point. That I've been very fortunate that all of the RSCs in my group have done really great work with the academics, so that where there is contention, I feel strong and able to go to the academic and say, sorry, I'd really like to push your project back a month or two, within reason. Obviously, I can't say by a year or anything, but because we've got quite strong buy-in from the research community at Newcastle, they really like the service that we offer, they really like the team. There's that mutual respect there, so that I can have those difficult conversations because we have quite a strong reputation. So I do a lot to protect that reputation. Because it's so valuable when the chips are down and you're having to have these difficult conversations. All of the work that you've done to foster that reputation and to have those relationships with individual academics really comes into its own. If you've got no relationship or you've got a fraught one, difficult conversations become even more difficult. So yeah, that's usually how I look at contention.
Yeah, and there's always a risk as well that if you are trying to resolve a contention, then you've got to be very careful that you don't avoid the conversation with, say, person A, just because that's going to be a slightly more difficult conversation with person B, which again is another reason why governance is quite useful. I mean, I must admit, one of the things I find with contention, as much as anything, is where RSC is concerned as well, is it almost ends up where people end up in lanes. The RSCs in the group end up in lanes, and because if we're so contended, and we often are so contended that there's little flexibility, then as someone's current project ends, then there's maybe only one choice for the next project, and that's really tough. And that's why I use the sort of term lanes, because people then struggle to break out. So I'd be interested if anyone on the panel has any ways I could break out of that. Any advice?
The way that we structure our allocations is that we work in, this isn't completely true, but we generally work in 50% chunks when you're putting people on projects. So most people are working on two things at once, which some extent. But beyond that, I also try and make projects like the smallest unit being a month. And I know Chris Woods is slightly different, but it means that even though not everyone is finishing at the same time, you have a stronger chance of more people in your team being available at the same time, because it's always the first of a month. Yeah. So if you've got a big enough team, there's usually 5 or 6 people who are all available on the 1st of May, that kind of thing. So it gives you that flexibility. If you've got people ending ad hoc, it becomes quite hard.
Okay, that's really nice. So the 50% thing we do quite, and that works well. It generally works for the RSCs as well. There are some who don't like that, so we try and have them on one project if that's what they would like. We always try and do that sort of thing. But yeah, I like the minimum allocation. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, if I could come.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so I'm slightly a different side to Mark. So I actually have a 6-month minimum on the project because it then makes future planning easier and gives me more notice of when I make changes. It's like a 3-month minimum notice of the start of a project and 6-month minimum size of a project. But what I do is with the teaching side, I expect all of the RSCs in the group to be able to teach. And then my teaching money is almost like slush fund is the wrong term, but it's almost like a slush fund where I'm able to move people into that. And then they're taking their turn doing the teaching and they can sit in the teaching part until we find a project which is interesting for them. So that's a way of breaking them out of being embedded or, out of a thing and that they're not liking potentially or not fitting them well. And then they can come back out of the teaching pool to then go into a sort of a research pool. And as long as we can, and also the other good thing about having it as a teaching pool is while they're then not working on the project or they're not working 50% on the project, they're then becoming very familiar with all of the training that we have, so what we consider our best practice, and that brings their skills up to date across all of the languages that we would consider supporting.
Thank you. Ed?
I don't know, there's too much to add since I learned most of what I know from Christopher and Rob on how you do this. But what I would say is I think so far we've been quite lucky in my team. So we've had various things come along, and like Mark was saying, sometimes we've gone back to a PI and said, can we delay a bit, or can we cut it from 100% to 50% for a month or something in order to fit some new things in? Because there have been a lot recently of kind of almost like emergency funding calls, and people keep coming to me and saying, I've got this much money to spend on RSC, I've got to spend it all by the end of March, and they're talking to me in December. So finding ways to make it work. And so far, I've been lucky enough to make it possible to meet everybody's demands. I think I'm quite a good organizer and project manager and so on, but I think it's worth admitting that there's been some luck which has allowed it to happen, and I do anticipate times where we'll have to be saying no to people. I've not hit that yet.
So I think that's a really good point there, being able to sort of have those conversations and saying, can we change the shape, should we say, of the allocation? So I'm very lucky in Manchester. I have a team of senior RSCs who pretty much do the sort of wrangling with people these days, the academics these days, and split the RSC work up into various portfolios. And actually, even when we get these things coming in where people say, I've got like this amount of money and I need to spend it by this amount of time, when you actually do the math, it's like, well, there's literally not enough time to do that. Having a conversation, it's usually, well, I'd like it done by then, but actually, I can any time in the next 12 months is fine, and that's how we sort of end up getting through. So, is there anything? We've got a hand now. Okay, so.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm very much interested in the practicalities. How do you visualize and manage the capacity of the team? How do you know how much time do you have for each people, and when you can fit someone in a project? Because I haven't found a proper way yet.
Would like to go with that one, Mark. You seem to be twitching.
Okay.
Sorry, Mark Turner, right?
I'm transitioning from something I call the Spreadsheet of Doom to a tool that is built on top of a third-party application called HubSpot, which is a CRM, a customer relationship management tool. I think it's going to be my answer to one of the other questions. On top of that, I'm building some just a basic web dashboard that visualizes some of the data you've highlighted. So HubSpot's very good for tracking projects, but not so good for tracking assignments, like people on projects, that kind of thing. But because of the way we cost recover, Each person on the team has an availability of 220 days a year, and so I just times up by the number of people I have available, subtract some time for training and management time and that kind of stuff, and I have this number of days, thousands of days per year that I can deliver RSC activity, and then it's sort of a Gantt chart view of projects and people who's working on what between which dates, and then we sense check that against. We have a timesheet tool called Clockify, but there are many others out there, and we compare the two to make sure that what we've sort of planned marries up with what people are recording time against, and if that diverges massively, then that's a conversation with the RSC as to why that is.
Yes, we're still very much still on the spreadsheet of doom. It's interesting that you've, done what we all get tempted to do, is build a tool on top of a tool, because they're never quite right, are they?
Yeah.
And we're also, so I don't know whether other people are in a similar situation, because we, in Research IT, we sit in IT services, and IT services has all this, let's call it infrastructure, for timesheets and so on, and we're sort of strongly encouraged to use that, and it's not always quite what we'd like. So, Mark Wilkinson, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so the overall kind of decision on which projects will get worked on is made by the allocation committee, so that's done kind of externally to us. The who's going to do what part is done by the head of the RSE team, but it's challenging because the DRI RSE team isn't in one place, and all of them are embedded in other teams. So it's a very complicated negotiation about when individuals are available within those teams, so that, because essentially DRAC will fund one FTE in a team, but it's not an individual. So therefore you kind of get the right people. So that gives us flexibility of who does what. It gives us access to more skills, but then it also has the challenge of actually managing it. And obviously there's also the issue about how much effort is needed for the project. That's something that we're getting better at, because now part of the review process is that the RSCs work with the PI after a proposal has gone in, before it's reviewed by the allocation committee. The RSCs actually look at it and do a scoping exercise to see, if a PI has asked for 6 months effort, is it actually 6 months work? Because we've had all the extremes you can imagine, where we've had, people asking for 3 weeks of RSE time for a project that was essentially rewriting a huge code from scratch, and was going to take over a year. And the other one where someone asks for a year and actually it's an afternoon's work. So it's our minimum allocation is 3 months. Projects that are less than that, we just fit in around the big projects. But ultimately then it does come down to, from a DRAC perspective, is a spreadsheet that says who's doing what. So. But I have made a note of that tool, because that HubSpot sounds interesting.
We tell researchers not to use spreadsheets, and we're using them ourselves. Chris, what do you do in this situation?
Spreadsheet of doom, but because the Institute just works so beautifully. So again, this is why when I set up, we had the minimum allocation. So the minimum allocation is 6 months of 50%, and a maximum allocation is obviously anything what anybody wants to do. And it means that I have that sort of 6 months, 50% Tetris block, and it's just then fitting the Tetris blocks into the spreadsheet. And because I require a 3-month notice on the start of project, it means it's not that onerous to keep the Tetris blocks all aligned up and everything done. And it means I have visibility, because the projects tend at Bristol to be on the 1 year to 2 year basis. It means I can see that, we have far too many projects going forward for the next year to 18 months. I think part of what helps with the management is that ability to say no. So one of the things which I very deliberately did at Bristol is decide not to meet demand. So I kind of set it that we would grow at a rate of about 2 RSCs per year, and always be just under where I thought demand was, and try not to advertise too much to meet demand, to generate demand. Because I think there's kind of a sustainable growth rate where you're kind of below, you're meeting all of the demand there is, and there's a little bit more demand, so people then really want you. And that's a slightly nicer place to be than when you then move to, you've got more capacity than demand, and you're always trying to find ways of making sure people are paid. And that's when then managing the spreadsheet of doom becomes a horrible experience, because it's a spreadsheet of doom. I have all these gaps I need to fill. For me, it's a spreadsheet of, it's Tetris, and I can see I'm bursting past the top of the screen.
It sounds like you've got the Tetris game where you only get the long four. Some of us have got the Tetris game where we get the...
Yeah, exactly. And those things with the last, like when you have to spend by March, I just say no to those, because they are the things that destroy that.
So were you going to say?
I was going to ask, how do you deal with the ones when they say I have to spend it now, but you've just answered that. So, how do they cope? This is back to question 2. But how do they cope, Christopher? How do they cope when you say no? Oh, he's gone.
So when I say no, this is why having the free tiers is really important. So the free tiers are the training, teaching, plus our Ask RSC service for an RSC that's core funded that I can allocate however I want to allocate. And what we do is, if it's on that really tight project, so it needs a day or a week's worth of work, I can give them kind of the free RSC help, while I, as the head of RSC, then help them to find another funding scheme to apply for more money. And what happens then is it kind of gets them into this idea that an RSC isn't someone who flies in at the last minute and does something quick and then flies away again. It is about building that long-term and sustainable partnership. And to be honest, they really like that then. I think they hate the I have money I have to spend in 3 months as much as everybody else does.
Okay, so it's sort of no, but let me help you figure out the long-term solution.
One thing I'm toying with is being more open with capacity. So internally, I know what the wait time is for a web developer or a data scientist, whatever, and just to say the wait time for any RSC. So I haven't quite decided yet what I'm going to do, but I could advertise that and say, before you even approach me on our website, this is how long the queue is. And it's sort of saying no by proxy in some sense.
You could have the traffic light system like, this is how long it takes a laptop to appear. At the moment, it's ages because of the Egyptian. Same for an RSC.
Yeah.
Okay, so to sort of follow on from that then, and to perhaps needlessly stretch the Tetris analogy even further, how accurately are you able to forecast future need for the data you have? And the Tetris analogy there would be, how many of the upcoming blocks can you see into the future? I'll start with Ed this time.
So I have a nice mix at the moment of long projects and short projects. So I know everyone in my team who needs to be cost recovered is 50% of their time on something that's 2 years or longer from today. So I know that exists, and then I know when the shorter ones finish, I can see them. So I'm saying to people that come, can I have work? It's like, well, yes, there's about 4 months before anything can happen, generally at the moment. But I really want to keep a balance of being able to think, I know that person has at least some work for years, but being able to give them other new, particularly apt work for them at much shorter notice than that. I don't want someone coming along and going, oh, it would be so good if this person was available, they would be perfect for this, but they're booked until 2025. I don't want that.
I think that's a whole other question. Maybe we'll come back to it along the lines of in the industry we work in, because when you work with someone and it goes really well, they naturally want to work with them again, and they're getting the requests for the particular person over and over again is an interesting one. But I'll pass the forecasting question over to my left and ask Mark Wilkinson.
So on the hardware side, so in terms of our compute services, we're always oversubscribed. So we know what's required from the science case, so we have a general sense of it. And because the funding is never quite enough, the systems are always smaller than we would like. and so we're demand, they're always full. The allocation process decides exactly what gets done in any given year. In terms of how accurate it is, it's reasonably good in the sense that we've never yet deployed something and then not been able to fill it. But then again, I'd like to be in a position where we just got it right, rather than where we deploy a new system and it's immediately a factor 2 oversubscribed, which is kind of where we are at the moment. So I think that the size of the services is reasonably good. On the RSC side, it's more difficult because the demand fluctuates, and what we're now actively, there are a lot of work has happened in a few areas within DRI and on some of the codes. What we're now moving into is a phase where we want to strategically encourage certain communities to do more work on their codes and to work with the RSCs to do that. And that's more challenging because you're essentially saying to people, in the future, your code is going to struggle on some of the future architectures. Maybe it's time to start looking at what needs to be done with it. So that's where we can control the demand because we're generating it. But it also means that at some point, several communities will realize, right, it's time, and then suddenly the demand goes from being kind of normal to being twice what it was last year. So and we are, I'm often the person with the money that has to be spent by the end of March going to groups saying, can we buy one of your people for the next 6 months? So.
Mark Turner, forecasting.
Yeah, I think this is where tools like HubSpot really come into their own, because it gives you that way of collecting all that data and then giving you a unified view of what's actually going on in your project pipeline. So the way I have it set up is a Kanban board style, where I've got all these columns and I'm moving as many things from left to right as I can. Left being I've arranged a meeting with an academic who's asked to speak to me, through to we've completed the project. So columns in between there would be things like bid prep, where you're just talking about maybe putting something in, to grant writing, where you've firmed up and you know where you're going to put it, submitted to funder. After that, it either becomes it's not being funded, or that it's funded and awaiting allocation, which is the really scary column, because that basically means we've got the money and we've committed, but we haven't decided who's going to do the work yet. To allocate it, someone in the RSC team's picked it up and then completed. So as things progress through that system, the sort of risk of you being able to deliver the project increases, as I'm seeing this like wave approaching of these projects, and that wave will grow and shrink depending on what things get funded. But it means I have all of that business intelligence. I have a complete picture of our entire project pipeline at any one moment. On top of that, I know the wait time of every individual RSC, like when they're due to finish their projects at what capacity, and I can sort of marry those two things together, and it lets me know relatively early, maybe not as early as Chris, but early enough that I can make recruitment decisions. I'm very much like Chris in that I'm quite risk averse, so I definitely don't want to be in that position where I've got more RSCs than projects and you end up worrying about redundancies and all that. I never want to be there. But the flip side of that coin is maybe I'm too risk averse and end up making hiring decisions too late or at the very last minute. So it's a real fine balance. But it's about trying to get as much business intelligence and as much data around your decision-making process as you possibly can, so that you're not just taking a shot in the dark, basically.
Yeah, and more data can perhaps help us make a case to our institutions that actually it wouldn't be that much of a risk if they would perhaps underwrite a couple of posts even, and they might even, almost certainly will get their money back. So Chris, forecasting, it feels to me like you have this fairly nailed. Do you have anything to
yeah, I mean, it kind of works because we always make sure the RSC's costs are on the ground, and so you always have that. You go on the ground. It's going to be 3 to 6 months before you know if it's been awarded. Then 3 months or so before it's going to be, needing to have the person in post. So it's like playing Tetris with the ghost Tetris bricks that can vanish when you're playing it. So it's kind of fun. The challenge though at the moment is particularly Brexit, and I hate to use the word Brexit in this, but we have European Research Council grants which have been awarded, But because they're not going to be funded, and the UK has said that they're going to come in and step in and fund it, we've currently got one project that's supposedly starting in the summer, where we've allocated, we've been told the money will definitely come through, but they're not actually going to tell us the money is here until probably just before the project starts. And so things like that can just mess up any kind of forecasting system. And that's where having the free at the point of use RSC who can sometimes pick up the load when they need to, so you can do a little bit of prep work and then ask them to delay the start, or by having some of your teaching team, if you can move things towards, okay, we can start the project in the summer, well, actually, you can then move your teaching team off as kind of like a little rapid reaction force to kind of do some work on the project, get charged to it, and then hire someone a bit later. The other really big challenge with forecasting at the moment, I think everyone's probably experiencing this, is it used to be you would put an advert out for an RSC and you'd be able to hire them relatively quickly on a first round. But what I've been seeing in the last sort of 6 months is that it's really hard to hire RSCs at the moment. I think competition from companies which enable people to work from home wherever they wish to work on good salaries, from different countries, that's really bled to the pool of people who want to apply to universities. I think particularly at Bristol, but I'm sure as other places, we don't have a clear work from home policy or hybrid working policy, which is putting people off. And so where I used to say 3 months notice, like they knew I could hire someone if I really had to, it's now becoming a much harder thing for me to guarantee that I know I'll be able to hire somebody.
I think maybe I've been lucky so far. We haven't had an issue with hiring RSCs yet, but enough people have told me this week that they have that I wonder whether I'm going to start seeing that myself soon. So that's a bit worrying.
You're the cause of the problem.
Oh yes. Well, yes. Well, communities at Manchester keeps wanting more RSCs. So yeah, something you said in there, Chris, that I think it would be interesting to expand out. Liz talked about going on the grant and then finding out with about 3 months' notice whether that grant's going to get funded or not. So I suppose I'd be interested to know what sort of level of over allocation do people do with grants, given the fact that what's the average success rate of a grant? It's low. I mean, 30% sounds high to me at the moment. So, I mean, do you sort of go for sort of 3 grants and hope that you get one?
That's generally what we do, yeah. We're somewhere in that 25 to 30% is usually what I estimate, but that breaks down by faculty or discipline as well. So if you're working with some eminent researcher, their application success rate is higher. This is why we track projects from meeting to completion, so that we can have a view of what's currently with a funder and look at that scary pile and think, okay, maybe about a third, a quarter of these are going to come off, and we make decisions based on that assumption. It's not a foolproof assumption, but it's not really let us down so far. It's not worried me.
Ed?
We keep getting people coming and saying, my postdoc left and I've got 6 months worth of money left on a grant. So that's no notice at all, but we've been able to cope so far. I generally find that people come to me having forgotten to tell me they put my RSCs on a grant, or people put my RSCs on a grant and never talk to me again. So I don't even know if it was. I could check if it was funded if they talk to me in time for me to find them in Work Tribe. But it's all a bit unknown to me, really. I've not got an answer to that at the moment. It just so far works.
Yeah, my experience as well is that there's so many variables. There's the work that does come in with no notice. There's the stuff that you just don't know whether it's going to get funded, and as you say, sometimes you're not told.
Yeah.
And I suppose when it hits, it all kind of looks the same. So we've got a question in the audience then.
Yeah, just Just curious, has anybody done any work to look at the success rate of grant applications that specify on the application RSE time versus those that don't, and whether or not funders are more likely or less likely to fund projects that actually say, right, I'm including an RSE in this?
I can partly answer that. I think SSI did a report into that. It's not quite that question, but it's they did a report where they looked at people that were explicit about including software development in their research grant applications. It's a similar question, but it would be an interesting thing to do. The other thing, just to follow up what I think you just said, was the other classic, and I'm interested to see if other people suffer from this, is people put an RSC in a grant, they don't tell you, and they also don't include overheads because they're just technicians, and that causes repeated chaos for us because they're not technicians, they're valued members of research staff from my point of view. And the other classic is if you put 4 grants in and you think one of them is a bit iffy, don't really want to do that one, but we'll stick it in anyway, it's always bound to be the most funded.
Always. And it's often the most interesting one as well.
At the end.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a hand up
Yep.
I've got a question from the online participants here. Does being unsure of which projects may be funded impact on the skill mix you have within your RSE team?
That's a good question. Skill mix. I think that's a really good general question to talk about. How do you maintain a skill mix? How much sort of horizon scanning do you do? Mark Wilkinson.
Yeah, so that is an interesting question. It's we get around that by buying into larger teams, so we kind of find where the skills are that we need. So it's something we don't have to do very often, where we actually have a complete lack. The other thing we do is look, if within the groups we're already working with, we can't find the right skills, we then sometimes subcontract some of the work kind of on a 6-month basis to groups that have particular expertise that we need. But yeah, if we're in a slightly different situation because of the way we're funded, so we don't have this problem of having too many grants or not enough grants, because essentially once every 3 years we project how many RSCs we need, and we either get them or we don't. And then the main challenge is hiring, and that's a huge problem. So if wherever we're trying to hire, if we're actually trying to add someone to a team, that's been the challenge at all the sites over the last 2 years.
I have to say, from my perspective, I think I've pretty much given up hiring to a particular mould, and I look for people who already have a range of skills who show a desire to learn new ones and go from there. Also, you know, if someone comes to you with a project where you don't have an RSC who has that skill mix, well, that's a development opportunity for someone, perhaps. Chris, what are your thoughts on hiring particular skills and maintaining a skill mix?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. So communication is the major skill I go for when I try and, hire an RSE. I'm going to give away how you get through my interview, but if you can show you're really good at communicating, you've done a very good job. I think rather than hiring for skill sets, one of the things that I do is actually try and be strategic of what types of skills do I want to have in the team moving forwards. And then because you know that you're going to get maybe 1 in 3, 1 in 4 grants funded, you can concentrate your effort on generating grants and relationships with areas of the university that, enable you to develop those skills. So early pandemic, it was like I suddenly fell in love with R because I suddenly realized how brilliant R was at so many things, and developed the strategy to basically develop expertise in R within the group by developing projects in those areas and getting those grants funded. And that worked relatively well. I see a similar thing now with sort of your kind of JavaScript sort of interactive apps. And again, thinking about how we can build those things into projects and then develop relationships with academics to then develop the grant applications so that we can then have a good chance of getting a project which would need those skills. On a comment that was a bit earlier from Mark about overheads, again, there are different models of funding RSCs, and the thing which I've been very careful at Bristol to do is to make RSCs postdocs. So I manage a postdoc pool, I don't manage a group of technicians, And so when people say, how do you cost them in? It's like, they are postdocs, they are identical to postdocs, cost them as postdocs, they come with overheads as postdocs, blah, blah, blah. And kind of by going down that route, it also kind of sets the mindset of the PI on the project to be the right thing. It's kind of like we're both then mentoring this person who's a member of their research team, and then it becomes less important that they don't have the domain knowledge. So I can take someone who's from a physics background and put them into an epidemiology project, because you can have that effectively, they come in with the software knowledge, and then the PI on the project then treats them like a postdoc and helps them to get the domain knowledge.
Yes, Mark?
Just to make a comment on that, I think the one challenge is there's not a completely uniform approach between the research councils about whether what Chris has just said is allowed. So whether an RSC counts as research or not is something which, yeah, not all the research councils agree on that. I won't point fingers, but
there's also the slight trickiness where you get the 80% funding thing. So my RSCs are not like postdocs, they are technicians as far as our research support finance people are concerned. There have been situations where I have to go to the college and say, you know, the kind of magic slush fund you have for dealing with the fact that funding councils only give you 80% of your money. I need some of that if you want all the time that you've said you want. Or you can have less time, because we're not doing the sort of the estates charge, and we all know what the estates charge is for. We don't have that on my RSCs, so we don't have any flexibility.
Yeah, a similar issue in Manchester in the sense that because we sit in IT services, which is professional services, we are of the overhead as opposed to we have a couple of different funding models. We have a day rate, which is literally salary, national insurance, USS type calculation. We use 220 days as well. And then if we do go on a grant, which is only funded 80%, then we have to have those conversations with the school. But generally, the school's quite happy because they get the overhead, and to give us the extra, 20% for the person, they still get some left over. So RSCs look doubly good for the departments in that sense.
But just to come back on that, for things like DRI, so projects, and I know it's not just DRI, there's other STFC projects where it's a kind of a national program. So the place where the university where the RSC is being hired is not actually getting any benefit from it. This becomes a huge problem, because if they're not going to top up the 20%, because it isn't. That's basically subsidizing the research from some other university. And that's at the moment, that's something we're struggling with within DRI.
So I believe there's a question out there somewhere.
Thanks. So before we got onto the overheads question, there was some discussion of skills balancing. Chris was talking about hiring up, with our skills and so on. One of the tricks we've been working on as we've built our new job description framework is we don't want one job description per particular set of skills, but nor do we want a situation where I have to hire the single best performing person, regardless of the fact that I really need an HPC person this week, or I really need a data scientist this week, or I really need a web programming person. So we put quite a bit of effort in with HR to be allowed to use the candidate must have one of the following specialisms. We put them all in a generic JD, but we've agreed with HR that the adverts can say. The JD says from time to time during an advert we will specify explicitly which specialism we're looking for, and the advert's allowed to specify that, and then we're allowed to use that in filtering, and that's enabled us to get to the point where we can still do the balancing of particular skill sets, and this week we want an HPC focused developer without having 95 trillion job descriptions. We have a grade 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10 job description for each of research software engineer, research infrastructure developer, data scientist and data steward, and that's it.
Yes,
Which is still 4 times 5, but it's fewer than 95 trillion.
Yeah, we've gone down the route of the generic job description that can be specialised in the advert, and has worked quite well for us. Actually, we took inspiration, if one can use that word, from Sophia, which talks about technical specialisms, which is a kind of horrible phrase, but that's the algebra that then allows us to sort of say in the advert that actually we're looking for a mobile person or a computational scientist. So I'm aware, Mark, we didn't come to you about skills mix. So
it was not really. It was basically to echo everything that the others had said. I started the group only hiring generalists because I was sort of in startup mode, and you need flexibility that most people could give anything a go. And I was anticipating that as we grew, there would be less risk in hiring a specialist in any given domain because you could always reliably get enough project work to support that person. But as we've sort of got to that size, I actually now more appreciate the value of people who are willing to give stuff a go. It's a development opportunity, that kind of thing. So we've generally just kept hiring people. The one place where it's really given me pause for thought is we could really do with a graphic designer. This is it used to be me, but I haven't pulled the trigger on that yet because I just think the context shifting for this poor person, it would be awful. We want them to do a little bit on loads of projects, but they'll be doing about 20 different projects. So I haven't done it, but it's the one thing that would make me think hard about getting someone who really does like one thing.
Yeah, and I'd echo that for user experience. And as I say, the reason I've not gone too far down that route yet is that they would be spread so thinly. It would be awful for them. So I need to think of some other way. And what's the size of group that can maintain those sorts of expertises alongside the work that's, I suppose, being paid for. I mean, it would have to be paid for, but the way these things go, someone puts an RSC on the grant, they're not expecting to pay for a graphic designer and a user experience person as well, even though that's really, really useful. Right, a couple more questions out there. So, James again.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up on that graphic designer point because I think it's really interesting. We, in the RSC story, think that it's a good idea to have division of labour and do team-based research and have our pools of specialists rather than every research group hiring their own RSCs and data scientists and so on. Therefore, it would be hypocritical of us not to want to embrace other pools, perhaps upstream pools of other kinds of expertise that we work with. So for me, what I'm looking to do is see the growth of other pools working on the same model as the RSC pool for skills that can contribute to research and innovation across the university. Design and UX is one of them. Another that's emerging is information governance and security skills. I would dearly love to have a high-functioning, droppable into projects at 30% FTE on the RSC model pool of those kind of folk. One that's been made to work in UCL really well. We discovered it a few months ago, but they've been basically doing the same story as us over the last decade in a completely different area, is public engagement professionals and people who are really good at supporting crowdsourcing and citizen science. There's a great team, and people can go out and grab 30% of one of them and stick them in their project, just like we do. So the more of that there is around the university, the more we can delete the concept of the postdoc and have research professionals across the university instead.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Marion.
Yep, there are a couple of questions here online. So would you rather have them bit by bit, or shall I read them out all in one go?
Let's have one, and then we'll.
Okay, so the first one is, do any of the panel's RSEs end up embedded with a research group? Does this pose any challenges to how they are managed and supported? How do you resolve these?
That's a great question.
Been through that.
Mark, Turner, you start.
No, you guys.
So we had we employed an RSC into our main pool, who's doing great work on a particular project at 50%, the same model as I outlined earlier. And then the PI of that lab really wanted to basically take him on full time to lead the development for that lab and lead a couple of other RSCs. So we basically came to an agreement, and he's now an embedded RSC in that lab, but still physically sits with us, with the rest of the team, so we get the benefit of his skills and experience in sort of conversation, but he's 100% funded, and like his long-term future is with that lab, basically. But it was quite an easy thing to do.
Yeah, so we've had that situation, and it's like that. It has worked well, and it actually comes back to a point on the skills mix that I wanted to make. That one possible difference maybe between for a facility like DRI and the community we have compared to some of the other RSC teams is there's cases where having very specific domain knowledge is really useful. So we have an example of the new system that we deployed in Edinburgh last year. Thanks to the work of one RSE and the technical teams and the vendor, the co-design process essentially doubled the performance of the system relative to what had been submitted in the tender bid. And so it was a combination of a whole lot of factors, but the RSE contribution was critical, but he was a domain specialist. And that was necessary. That's why we got, when you're really trying to optimize a system in a co-design process for a particular code, that domain-specific knowledge becomes really important. A generalist probably wouldn't have had it might have been feasible, but it wouldn't have been the same. And in terms of return on investment, that's incredible, because essentially it was an £8 million system. And you're doubling the impact of it. That's well worth the salary of one person for 6 months.
That's the case study.
Yeah. His name is James Riching. I should give him credit. Yeah.
Chris, embedding RSCs.
Yes, so I'd say most of the RSCs at Bristol are embedded RSCs because we go down the postdoc model. And generally, the RSC has myself as one manager and the PI of the project as the other manager. And we work together as a team, so the PI and myself, to be a research team working on a project. And it works very, very well then that the RSC feels that they have two people who are looking after them rather than just one person looking after them. This even worked when we did a project where we seconded an RSC across to Edinburgh, where then the PI was the Edinburgh PI and I still remained as the manager from Bristol. And we just had our project meetings over Zoom to Edinburgh, which was the same as having project meetings over Zoom to Bristol PIs.
Ed, embedding?
So we've got one of my RSEs is funded by a college, so he works exclusively for College of Arts and Law, doing whatever they need. I sometimes wonder if he'd like to go native and sort of, not have to follow all of our processes, but he's a good example of the real value of having the pool of RSEs, like Mark was saying, all sitting together, talking to each other, because he never works on any of the same projects as anybody else, but even today on our Slack, he's been answering all manner of queries from other people about how to do Django stuff and things. And so I don't mind having people embedded as long as they don't totally go native.
Yeah, so at Manchester we do the embedded thing, but because we try and sort of have people on 2 projects, 50% for example, it's never quite a full embedding. That's not entirely true across the board. There are people in the team who are fully embedded, and we see them at the Christmas party, and that's something last week at our Christmas party, because that was when we were able to have it. But I think one of the interesting things about that is that when we were in the office before COVID, then people had a desk in the group, in the central part, and they'd spend some time with a research group and some time in the centre. And now we're in this hybrid mode where the University of Manchester's sort of gone for a there's no such thing as fully remote. So it's sort of 20% is the minimum you can go from either end of the scale, really. And we're now sort of, there's not enough desks for everyone because we've rationalised our estate, and so we've got shared desks in the centre. But then those embedded RSCs, if they're coming in 1 day a week, do they sit with the research group? That's probably really useful. Do they sit with the central team? That's probably useful as well. But maybe there's not enough time on campus to do both. So it's a process, and we'll iterate, and we'll be agile about it. We'll see how it goes.
Could I add something in just quickly on that,
Yep.
Rob? I think the pandemic and remote working has actually made embedded work a lot better, because you're right, beforehand it was very much they would spend some time at a desk in the embedded group, and they would be required. I made everyone make sure they spent at least 1 day a week in a desk with the central group as well, so they were linked together. But when we then went online, Slack was brilliant, because what Slack did is it enabled us to have a everyday communal experience, regardless of whether you were virtually sat with the embedded group or virtually sat with the RSC group. And I think it's that sense of community of RSCs that you want to build, and then it almost becomes, there's no distinction between, are they spending most of their time on a project in chemistry, or are they spending bits of their time on different projects with different departments, and the distinction between the work style of embedded versus non-embedded becomes, they blend together.
Thank you. So, Marion, I believe there was another question.
Yes, actually 2 other questions. I'll put the one first that seems more related, and that is whether there's any room for a freelancer model within a given university, or even pulling in non-university people.
Freelancers, yeah, that's a really interesting one. So we've used let's say agency staff in the RSC team in Manchester. What we did there was we knew exactly who we wanted to use, and we got them to join the agency, and then they worked with us as an agency staff. And this was partly because we had some work that we absolutely kind of wanted to do, needed to do, and didn't have the capacity in the team. But anyway, that person's now in the team, because also at Manchester we have a way that if you've worked with us as an agency staff for long enough, you can apply as an internal person with any jobs. So we were able to do that. But I'd be interested in what other people have done around this. So Mark Turner.
We've not done it. I think that the biggest barrier for us is more of a legal and paperwork kind of thing. It's particularly questions around IP. It's not to say those problems aren't solvable, of course, but we've not yet been under enough pressure that I've really had to go to an agency thing. So I'm sort of on the spot. Like, I can imagine a situation where I would do it, so I'm not saying never, but I've never really had to think about it. So I don't really have a strong opinion weakly held.
The biggie for us wasn't IP, it was VAT.
Oh,
VAT on salaries.
yeah.
A lot.
Yes.
Ed.
So we've not done it. Other parts of IT services at Birmingham have used quite a lot of contractor kind of staff, particularly in areas of sort of networking. I mean, we think it's hard to hire RSEs. Hiring networking experts, that's not simple. We've also done the other side of things. So when James was at the Turing, he was setting up this network of RSEs all over the country who would be able to sort of join on projects. So we've seen the other side of the contractual bits in that of joining. I think Newcastle at least might have done the same thing.
Yeah, we've done quite a few Turing projects, actually.
Yeah, we tried, and we couldn't get our legal people to agree.
Yeah, it took like 2 years of back and forth with legal teams. James and I had a chat. That was all agreed and all was good, and then the legal teams took 2 years to agree things.
Yeah, we did that as well. James and I had the chat. It was all great, and then it never happened due to legal. But
Yeah.
there we go.
Oh, well.
So the experience of doing that in COVID was even worse than doing it from the Turing. So from the Joint Biosecurity Centre, we brought in some very excellent folk from RSC communities. Sheffield really helped. but boy, was the paperwork hard. And, took me 6 months to get someone in from European Molecular Biology Laboratory to the JBC. And we were like, people are dying here. Can we get the paperwork sorted out, please? I don't know.
Can I come in just on one thing on the contractor part?
Yeah, yes. Please do, Chris. Yes, Chris, please do.
Cool. So I agree. I mean, whenever we've tried it, it's just been the legal contract side has been the hardest thing, and it takes 6 months to 9 months to get the contracts through, by which time the project's over. But I also look at this the other side, that when we move more and more to freelancer and contractor work, you're increasingly casualizing the labor within a university. And I worry slightly that if you went to a fully contracted, like freelancer model, that we've basically we've taken RSC from being a postdoc working in a lab with not the world's most secure job to someone who's working effectively on a day rate. And we've removed all of the security from their post and actually made them have to work in this kind of very much self-employed manner. So I have this fear if we go too far down the contracting route.
Sure. So, Peter.
To return briefly to the subject of embedded RSCs, so speaking as an RSC that has been embedded in projects, albeit 50-50, but I liken the experience somewhat to how I see doing a PhD. Your experience will vary significantly depending on the group and the PI, and you don't know before you go in what that experience is going to be. So in terms of PhDs, one of the things that's happened that I can see over the last 10 years that I think is really positive is this CDT model, whereby you actually have your supervisor on your project, but also you have a supporting structure in the background that's sort of underlying that. And I think that's a model that could be brought, into RSCs as well, because, okay, fine, if the project goes, if it works, that's okay, you go off and do your thing. But actually then if it's less successful, if you're having difficulty, there's a bit of a sort of structure you can fall back on.
Does anyone from the panel like to?
Could I come in now? Sorry.
Can we go with Mark Wilkinson first and then you, Chris? Is that okay?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, so I would definitely agree. The experience we've had for even RSCs who were just focused, not really embedded, but focusing on with a particular group, the experience can vary wildly depending on essentially what the PI of the group, how much time they're willing to put into it. And a challenge is often that if the RSC isn't a domain specialist, and what they wanted was, and the group has a particular need, they may start to treat the RSC as if they were a postdoc who is a domain specialist, but they're not, and then they're putting on unreasonable demands. And so that having a network behind of support for each time we do that has been really important. We've had a few cases in the last couple of years where we've had to kind of step in and essentially explain to the PI again what an RSE is and where the line is, and effectively getting more buy-in from the research group in terms of what had to be done. But I think you're right, just embedding someone and then waiting for them to come back in 6 months or a year is really unfair.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I treat the embedded RSCs identical to the non-embedded RSCs, and we have weekly group meetings. My door is always open to them, and you're talking to them all of the time. And you're also taking part in some of the meetings with the PI, so having regular catch-ups with them. So you don't just abandon an RSC with the PI, because that is a recipe for disaster. And I think effectively by doing that, the RSC group and the head of RSC provide that support network almost like a CDT. And you could almost view an RSC group, as I say it, as being a CDT of coding experts who then go and do embedded projects, but have the support of the CDT behind them.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's fair to say at Manchester we've learned some of that the hard way. One of the things we do at the moment, because we've got quite a big team, and having a single meeting is kind of impractical. I mean, even monthly is difficult. But try and get the various senior RSCs who manage the portfolios, such as they are, to sort of get the people working on in their areas together every couple of weeks, which seems to help a bit and give people a bit of a grounding. But I'm always keen to learn more about what other people are doing in this space. So does anyone else on the panel have anything to say?
I would add that we have our own bit of very lightweight paperwork at the start of any RSC engagement, and it has various bits of information, boilerplate stuff such as, this is a collaboration, you're not buying a product, you're buying an expert's time. But it also then has a whole a list of the objectives that we're hoping the person will start with, because you do sometimes get a PI who goes completely absent for the first 2 months of a project, and at least knowing what you're meant to be getting on with to start with can be really, well, the opposite is really scary for some RSEs. If they're relatively new, they get dumped in this project. I'm meant to spend half my time and the PI won't tell me what to do. So having the list of what they should get on with to start with is really helpful.
Yeah. So Marion.
Yeah, I've got another online question. Back to Tetris. How would you handle the idea of a senior RSE? Clearly, RSEs would like career progression, but how does this then translate to the practicalities of costing in a pool-based system? A PI might have enough funding to fund a junior RSE, but you only have a senior RSE available. Or would you then need to assess projects based on the experience requirements of a project?
Right. Well, I have an answer for this, but I'm going to let other people jump in for this.
I guess our answer is that we don't distinguish. So we're set up slightly differently in that we're a research facility with a day rate, and we use that rate to cover all of our costs, including estates and all the rest of it. And we create our own training, travel budgets, all those kinds of things. It all gets poured into a big pot, and earlier on I was talking about how many thousands of days as a team of effort we can deliver. And it's just that big number divided by the number of days. So we don't actually distinguish between junior and senior. Like, we have our day rate, and really every time someone works on an RSE project, they're also paying a very small percentage of me in some sense. So we just charge that number. It works slightly differently for embedded RSEs, where someone's wholly within a particular project and there's that shared relationship that, like Chris has outlined, that number is based on the individual RSE and what grade that they're at. So it's more that model.
Yeah, we're similar in Manchester. We've done all the calculations based on the grade, the range of grades that RSEs could go on. And as I said before with our previous question, people are buying a service, and we fit the right person to that. So, would you like to?
I was just going to say we do have 3 different grades of RSE: RSE Senior, RSE Principal RSE, and the research group has to pay for the right amount for us, so it's not the same as you guys. But when I say to people, actually, they say I've put it in as a grade 7. I say, well, actually, you need to put that in as a grade 8. They tend to just change it in work tribe, nod, carry on, and it's fine.
Yeah, that's good. 'Cause my fear was always, if you're offering people that Manchester uses different numbers for its grades, but if you're offering people at the different grades, are you going to end up with some really, really good senior people underemployed because people have tried to fit it within a funding envelope, but it doesn't happen like that. Well, it hasn't in our experience so far. So I'm very conscious of time. I'm afraid I did wonder whether an hour and a half was going to be enough for this talk on managing a portfolio, and I've got Nikki waving at me from the back. So I'm sorry we've run out of time, and I know we haven't answered everyone's question, but we've got a coffee break now, and there's the unconference session coming up, and then there's there's drinks and dinner. So please do carry on these conversations. And I'm going to just take 30 seconds of chair's privilege and say that if people in this room, if anyone or online thinks managing a portfolio looks interesting or indeed challenging, and it's something you'd like to do, and these guys are laughing, I am hiring a head of research software engineering in Manchester. And unfortunately, the advert hasn't gone out. The HR said it would go out today, but it's not out yet. But please do look and keep on top of that and apply if this is what you'd like to do.
Can I come in on that? The same is true.
No time, sorry.
The same is true at Leicester, so there'll be a job advert imminently.
Anyone else got a job going? Okay, so I'd like to thank the panel, Mark, Ed, and Chris. Thank you very much.